Hello, fellow innovators. This is Patrick Emmons.
And this is Shelley Nelson.
Welcome to the Innovation and the Digital Enterprise Podcast, where we interview successful visionaries and leaders, giving you an insight into how they drive and support innovation within their organizations.
Today, we're welcoming Katherine Vandebelt to the show. She's currently the Global Vice President of Innovation at Oracle. Katherine's niche is in pharmaceutical clinical development and transforming organizations to meet aggressive financial and operational goals. She is also a podcast host of The Latest Dose, which explores the depths of innovation and human compassion in clinical research. Katherine received her bachelor's in pharmacology and physiology at the University of Toronto. Welcome to the show, Katherine.
Thank you, Shelley. And thank you, Pat. Thanks for having me.
Oh, welcome. Glad to have you here. Katherine, if you don't mind, please share with our listeners, what does it mean to be the Global Vice President of Innovation at Oracle?
Oh, well, great question. Sometimes I ask that myself each day. First, I'll start a little bit about Oracle is a large company and they provide solutions to many industries. Shelley mentioned that I focus on clinical research. So we also work in communications, construction, finance, hospitality, to name some. But our business unit is focused on health science. So we are looking to make it easy to bring new inventions to the market in health. And that's usually a pharmaceutical company, biotech company, medical device, and so forth. So in order for me to contribute to that goal, we're trying to help our customers invent at the speed of science. So as things speed up, we're trying to come up with new and better ways to help make that happen. And my focus currently is on the people that choose to participate in clinical research. So that would be a volunteer or a patient, and trying to make it easy, accessible, and inclusive for them to participate, as well as the healthcare providers who care for the clinical research participants or patients, and to make it easy for them to contribute, because we know how busy our healthcare providers are right now caring for patients. So it'd be great as they can also offer a clinical research option to them as well. So I'll repeat sort of in a nutshell, we're trying to come up with new and better ways to help our customers and clients move at the speed of science.
And are those customers and clients, are they primarily pharmaceutical organizations?
Yes, many are. And so they've come up with a new invention or a new indication. They're working with governments to show that it's safe and efficacious. And yes, the predominant market share is with them.
Awesome. If you could, I'd like to know more about how you engage with the volunteers and the patients to speed up that process to move to the speed of science.
So it's important to actually get to know patients. I was actually surprised through my career, and I've been in this industry for a while on the pharmaceutical side and now on the tech side, is that there's so much emphasis on privacy that some people actually forget you can just talk to people that have been in clinical research without, breaching that privacy gap, and really understand, why they choose to participate. Was it easy? Did they feel they were kept informed? Did they have the ability to achieve everything that was possible and manage their daily life at the same time? And so, really taking various opportunities to work with patient advocacy groups or individuals that have participated in clinical research. That's probably easier with larger indications that are prevalent throughout the society. And just, hear from them about what the whole journey was. A health condition is stressful, period. You get a diagnosis and you need to sort of deal with that. And then on top of it, then trying to figure out what path is best for you. And then possibly doing something new, like a clinical trial. Maybe you've never done one before, never heard of it before. So that's another level of stress and so forth. So I think it's really, really important for people in this industry to try and really make sure that there's tools, capabilities, processes that are supportive of just what those individuals are experiencing at this time.
Very cool. It's an interesting space right now. How did you get into this bag? I know your degree is in pharmacology and physiology. What made you go that route with your career?
Great question. So to be honest, I originally was going to be a pediatric dentist. And a lot of people that have a pharmacology degree go into med school of some kind. It's great to actually have the foundation of knowing how the body works and how drugs work in your body and so forth. I ran out of money in school. So I knew there was a new law that was passed in Canada that provided patent protection for pharmaceutical products where that didn't exist in the past. So they started to hire individuals to participate and run clinical research for pharma companies because one of the requirements is that 10% of the sales of the pharmaceutical products needed to be reinvested in research and development. So when I was graduating and in need of money, this law was passed. It was called Bill C-22. Therefore, they started to hire. And I was one of the first clinical research hires at Eli Lilly and Company in Canada. And I had such a great time. Like all of a sudden, 5 years later, going back to dental school didn't seem to make sense.
You enjoyed what you were doing so much that going back to dental school was not that attractive, or just feeling good? What was your thought process?
Well, I really felt why I was wanting to be in the medical field was to help people.
Mm-hmm.
And to be frank, when you're going through middle school or high school, you kind of still, at least when I went to school, you sort of know what the primary professions are. So, you hear about nursing or physiotherapist or occupational therapist or doctor, dentist or whatever. And I felt like I was actually achieving what motivated me was helping people. I was working with physicians. I was working in multiple indications. Back then, it was very different than it is now. You would be responsible for writing the protocol, creating the data capture methodology, collecting all the data, getting it to a statistician to analyze it, reporting on it. And so that just was extremely rewarding. Even though I didn't know the people that were participating in the clinical research studies, looking at the data and dealing with the data really gave me a sense of contribution, hopefully providing them with a sense of hope. And when you would some of them I followed for 13 years, some I followed for 2 years. And though you didn't know their name or where they lived or anything like that, there was just a little piece of them and their journey that you felt you were getting to know. And so my motivation and my desire to help others was fulfilled actually by joining the pharmaceutical company.
That's fantastic. It's so difficult when you're younger trying to figure out where you're going to go. What does it really motivate you? And I think that's a big challenge for a lot of folks to figure out where do I really fit in, because we only have a certain scope of what's possible, right?
Absolutely.
And so with that idea of wanting to help others, creating a healthier world and hope, how are you achieving that with your current role as Global Vice President of Innovation at Oracle?
One of the challenges that exists in clinical research is having the population participate that is reflective of the population that's actually dealing with the condition or the illness. And so what we are working on is how to be more inclusive, how to ensure that there's an ability for diverse cultures, backgrounds, opportunities for really what's reflective of the population to be involved in the assessment of safety and efficacy. That is so important because, this really is a controlled environment, with an experiment and a clinical trial. Maybe this is not the best way to say it, but I always think you want healthy, sick people. They don't have a lot of contraindications. They don't, you're trying to control for a lot of variables. And so often that's taken to, major cities or academic hospitals. And that's not necessarily reflective of the people that are actually experiencing these illnesses at this time. So we're really, really sort of focused on, yes, those places are great to conduct research, but then there's, we have to make sure we get into the rural settings or the community settings or the inner city parts and making sure that we're making it's trusting, it's a trusting sort of experience, right? This is your health, and that it is accessible and it able to support the demands of the different individuals that are going to engage in it. So that brings in choice. So we shouldn't basically be treating every single patient the same, but we need to be able to collect data that doesn't have the variability that you're able to get insights from it. So, how do you do it successfully to handle all these different sources of data coming in from different places? How do you ensure that if a patient has a choice to go to the clinic or get something done, like in a mobile bus or something, that, you're going to collect it in a continual way? And how do you make people comfortable that they choose the option that is best for them so that they actually stay in the study? Because that's one of the key things to make it happen. So it's really looking at different ways and helping technology to, enhance the ability to generate that awareness, to help people make a good informed decision. And then once they choose to participate, to try and make it easy for them to do that.
So, Katherine, I'm curious, who are the advocates for these patients to get into these clinical trials when you talk about, being more inclusive? Is it the hospitals, the doctors, the clinics? What does that look like?
It depends on, so I'm not trying to be basic, but it does depend on the different groups. So if you're dealing with somebody that's really, their health literacy is quite high, chances are they will go to an academic center because they actually are aware of finding sort of that expert in that field or someone that's proficient in that field. Other individuals that are maybe not as health friendly or health literate may have an excellent relationship with their pharmacist, or they have an excellent relationship with maybe someone in their community center or community church.
Like a nurse, something of that nature.
It could be, like a nurse practitioner, someone like that. And so then it's whether or not that trusted connection leads to another connection. And then how the decision is made, how that person is supported to be informed. So there's been a lot of work that's gone around, people say electronic informed consent, and it probably does that a disservice because before you guys are probably all familiar with the paper documents when you go to the doctors and they want your permission and all that type of stuff. Well, now think about how you can use technology to add videos that might be more gender specific or videos that are more culturally specific to explain maybe your condition, to have it in multiple languages, not just have it in English, but have it in your spoken language, to be able to give you opportunities to ask questions rather than read a document and sign and date it at the bottom, and then to have a live person as well as these electronic capabilities. So, and you might have experienced this in learning with your children, like through the pandemic. I'm not exactly sure because I didn't have that sort of experience, but really utilizing like a whole different level of content and in different formats and so forth, and being able to do that. And so we need to do that at the awareness stage as well. And so rather than just, rely on this communication or announcement or publication or so forth. And I think we can capitalize it because of COVID-19. It's brought a lot of awareness around clinical research, but not enough for people maybe to decide to participate. So we still have a lot of work to do to use a lot of these channels and these approaches to help with awareness, and then ultimately to create that trusted conversation and then move them to a place where they can actually contribute.
You bring up the COVID scenario, and I think that's very interesting because there were a lot of studies that I wasn't aware of until somebody brought it to my attention that if you were a certain age or weight, there were specific studies that you could get involved in during the COVID. I would say that like the really scary part of it, right? In that late 20, early 21, where I think there was a lot of fear. So is that one of the bigger challenges is the communication and getting that information out into the hands of, like you mentioned, those not directly connected to the healthcare industry?
Yes, that's part of it. So how I look at it sort of in a larger picture is that there's an opportunity. It's either because you've been given a diagnosis or you need a test done or you have a condition or whatever, but there's something that you now can make a decision on. And there are multiple options now available to you. And right now, what I'd love to see is that participating in a clinical trial is one of the options that are available. But I think the key with any health decision is you need to make the right health decision for you at the time. So if you're afraid, this is just my opinion, I'm sure other people would have other opinions, I wouldn't suggest you go into a clinical trial. I think you need to feel confident that this is the right course for you, that it fits in, that it makes sense, that you want to do this. But often fear comes from lack of knowledge. So then how do you get the knowledge to people before they actually have to make the decision versus, they have to make the decision and then you kind of like pile the knowledge on top. So yes, you're right. There was a lot of these opportunities that materialized, and there's a lot to be learned when you're actually introducing a new medicine into the community. And they know that there's what we call it cohorts, so subsets of populations that should be studied quite explicitly. And an example I could give you was like pregnant women. So generally, if never, you approach a pregnant woman and ask her to be in a clinical trial because it's not a proven therapy. Okay. So there's kind of two ways you do research. So we learned through COVID-19 that actually a number of pregnant women did get vaccinated. So through their healthcare professionals, we then approached them, and not me, us personally, but our customers approached them and said, would you like to contribute to a study since you've already been vaccinated and you've now self-shared that you're pregnant? Are you interested in being in a follow-up study? And you'd be surprised the number of people that said, yeah, I'll do that.
That's great.
I'll do that. And what comes with clinical research is more care, right? Because you're having more touch points with your healthcare provider. You're being assessed on a regular basis. As information becomes available, it's shared with you. So it actually can be a very empowering and comforting and good care situation. And I think that's, what is really good about what actually comes out. Not only do we get information for the whole community, but individuals can actually get a much more concentrated and better touch care while they're actually going through this. And that can also rather than have this fear that you talked about, it can actually alleviate and get rid of some of that anxiety as well.
That's the first thing I thought when you mentioned what happens afterwards, right? Just the diminishing of the isolation, right? You're sharing information. I think that's part of what makes people feel a whole lot better when it's like, hey, I'm not in this alone. I am getting information. Other people are experiencing this, even if it's a negative thing, to know that it's not just you sometimes it's really powerful. I think as humans, we need that connection. I think we all recognize over the last couple of years, there is some bill to be paid on the lack of connection that we had for a while there. And so it's the first thing I thought with some of the things you were saying is feeling like you're connected with other people who are going through this with you would be immeasurably helpful.
I think that's a great point. And I think that's why patient advocacy groups have also come up around that. And also then that's a great opportunity to share experiences and also share experiences with clinical research and make each other aware as well, or nonprofit organizations that help with this. So you've actually spoken to, I think it's that shared experience, or I'm not doing this alone. And I agree with you. It's my opinion that drives a lot of the solidarity and a lot of the commitment to see things through.
So I'm curious, how do you select what you're, where are you focusing? What is the process by which I got to imagine in the innovation function that you're in, there's a lot of options to invest time, money, resources, all those wonderful things. How do you make a decision? How do you determine where to focus?
Great question. And it's not an easy answer. So
I could imagine not. I could imagine a lot of hindsighting on that one.
Yeah, that's very true. So I guess what's important, like in the years that I've been in innovation, which has been a few, I think what's important is that you create some sort of area in which you're focusing on. So as I've been speaking with you today, I say I really focus on making it easier for people, predominantly the volunteer, the patient, or the healthcare provider, to participate in clinical research. So that might sound like a very narrow scope, but it still is quite large. And then when you think of the various stages, you got phase 1 to phase 4 clinical research, you have the design phase, the execution phase, the reporting and summary sort of phase. And so then you sort of look at where the industry is still struggling. And so then we look at the various phases, and we're really, right now, we are focused on the design to, getting engaged and conducting the actual trials. So some people call that recruitment, some people call that study startup. There's, that sort of whole design to the enrollment sort of phase. And predominantly, there's been activity in that space for a long, long time, and different attempts have been made. But if you look at the data over the years, there's still a number of trials that never ever finish because they didn't obtain the size of the population they needed to have participate, or it took 2-3 years longer than they had anticipated due to the fact that they weren't able to find people. And then you get into the other issue we've already talked about, is was it really reflective of the population that we were looking to study? So we have to do it again. And all of that costs time, money, and it doesn't give us the insights we're looking for to make, the pharmaceutical industry make their future investments. So how do we look at, so this might sound a little bit odd, but, how do you look at other industries like communication or hospitality or food and beverage and say, what does that have to do with clinical research? Well, it has to do with people. And you try and look at those industries and, how do they create awareness, or how do they engender trust, or how do they create connections, or how do they stay connected, or how do they stay informed? So basically, you've got these big areas. You then look at where in the life cycle of bringing something to the market is still causing a huge pain that everyone sort of talks about. And then how do you sort of create and make up possible opportunities? And then how do you test them to see if they actually will have value or potentially solve the problem, or they are just, learned something and we'll apply that to the next one and let's do it again. So that's how we decide about, and if that's not clear, tell me and I'll give that another go.
No, I think it's clear. There's and I love the idea that experimentation, what's going on in the world. I think also part of the question that I'm curious about is, for you, what are some of those indicators about maybe it's not the right time, right? Like it's a good idea. I could see it making sense, but what are your thoughts and any experience about we were too early, we were maybe too late?
Okay, great. A great question. It's easy to tell that in hindsight. And as you experience more of those, hopefully you're getting better at making those decisions currently to try and influence moving forward. So we probably all remember when the smartphone came out. And then when the additional accessories came out, like all of a sudden now your scale can be connected to your phone, or your watch, and your heart rate can be connected to your phone, or your number of steps you're taking and all that type of stuff. So you can say, well, you know what, this is all part of my health. This is all part of my wellness. Maybe we could look at new ways to collect data and so forth. And so all of a sudden people get really excited about this new way in which information is collected. Rightfully so. It's exciting. It's different. It's effective. It's engaging. And then all of a sudden they'll say, well, let's do that. And let's apply that to clinical research. And so individuals, they really need to understand the regulations quite well. They really need to understand the ecosystem quite well. They need to pay attention to what's going on in the trends. And yes, that is a great thing to do, but it was not a great thing to do 10 years ago. It's probably a great thing to do now. And so how do you get there? Well, is the data reliable? Does it meet the parameters that would actually allow you to create insights for, or is it interesting? Is it a validated endpoint? And what does that mean? Did you even know to ask if it was a validated endpoint? So what happens sometimes is there's some great strides that are made, and there's some new ways of working that are made that are actually like very, very motivating and very, very encouraging. But you really do need to understand your industry that you're in and not see it as a blocker. Okay. So it was not that this way of collecting data was not feasible or not encouraging, motivating, or possible. It's just there was a right time to do that. And there was you had to know what sort of things you maybe needed to invest in first in order to pave the way for that to then take off. Because there's nothing worse than something being created and then it sits out there for multiple years stale. And then when the time comes and the market's ready for it, it still doesn't take off because it's been around forever and no one's used it and they don't trust it. And all of a sudden, a great idea or a great way of working doesn't scale. Again, not because it's not the right time. It just doesn't make, like, people just don't have trust in it. So it is a difficult, very, very difficult decision to make. And so I have ways that I've worked with my group to try and balance the creativity versus sort of assessing the right time or the wrong time for things.
Some of that, like you said, you can hindsight all day, but as you were talking, all I could think of it was like Zoom. Zoom existed before 2000, like March 18th, 2020, right?
Yes.
Which sure existed in a whole different way, March 20th, 2020, yes. Right? And the fact that there were people, and we're in the tech field, so like Zoom was already a thing for us, but it was interesting to me, the adoption challenges for a number of people who had never really worked on a digital video platform before, and how much it has become, the Xerox of COVID, right? Where it was a go-to move in many, many ways. So even it was a great idea before, and it got to be even better an idea very rapidly. And just from your perspective, because I wonder specifically on the Zoom component, I think we all knew remote work was going to be the future, regardless of COVID, right? I think maybe people would have put that calendar maybe, 5 to 6 years down the road. But is that the things that you think about as well when you think about like contingencies of acceleration of like trying to figure out where the market's going to go is really it's a fool's errand. But at the same point in time, when you think about disruptions and contingencies, is that stuff that goes through your mind when you go through this process of like, let's assume that we know nothing about what the world's going to do or what are going to be the priorities in 18 to 24 months, because there's no way to know.
So yes. And so this is how I talk about it with the folks that I work with, is that the first thing I ask them to do is, if they're working at home, to rearrange their desk so that it is a direct mirror to what they had before. So where their monitor and their computer and all that is, or if they're driving to work, to drive a totally different way. And so the key for that is that you've asked them to change. And then you ask them how they like it. And a lot of times they don't. Yet they're responsible for creating things that are going to change the way people work and change what they're going to do. So then when you talk a little bit about, why aren't you leaving your desk and office the way it was, or why aren't you going to continue to drive a different way to work all the time, is because they don't have to. They don't feel that their productivity or their contributions is significantly enhanced or appropriate in order for them to make the change. So then you say, well, then whatever you create and you think is going to be brought to the market, however, whether you piece things together, whether it's something brand new or whether it's just, whatever that looks like, is it has to be compelling enough for people to change. So you talked about Zoom. It existed, telemedicine existed, and so forth. But you know what? It wasn't a change that many people wanted to take the time to learn or wanted to necessarily maybe do it that way. But there all of a sudden was a crisis that came. So I call that like a burning platform. So it's a visual, like what you're standing on is burning. So you want to get off of it, right? You want to get to a place that's cooler, that's not going to cause you physical harm and so forth. And so the pandemic created that burning platform. And so it forced people to change. When you don't have that, you have to have a huge value proposition to get people to change. And so you really need to understand both. So, if we can come up with a way to improve a person's experience in clinical research, but we only, increase that by 1%, that's not enough. Like, for that one person. I'm not talking 1% across the world. I'm talking like
Right.
for that one person, that's not enough. So how do you get some tangible, qualifiable, and quantifiable information so that you actually know what your success criteria are, and then stick to them, measure them and stick to them? Because it's going to be rare that you have these burning platforms that happen over and over again. And so it's critical that even when you come up with the idea, you start to think about, what hurdle do I have to jump over, surpass for me to continue? Otherwise, I take this as a learning and I apply it to the next thing I'm doing.
That's fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today and share your experience and your background. Sounds like you're doing some really amazing things. It's such an exciting space to be in. I saw the growth numbers in the industry, and I would say that it's so much bigger an industry than I think it's ever been. I was thinking like 10, 12 years ago when I was recruiting for engineering students, just that space has blown up in such a big way. And so much so here in Chicago, we've got AbbVie and Abbott and Baxter, and just to name a few, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's a huge growing industry. It's amazing to think about what's going to be possible in the next decade, considering the petri dish we just went through. So, Kevin, thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing your experience and sharing your wisdom. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Katherine.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks, Shelley. Thanks, Pat. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you. You too. We also want to thank our listeners. We really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us.
And if you'd like to receive new episodes as they're published, you can subscribe by visiting our website at dragonspears.com/podcast, or find us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode was sponsored by Dragon Spears and produced by Dante32.